There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. They wear the clothes of a Tuesday night, smell like leftover pizza, and sound like the rain tapping against a window pane. You don't recognize them as pivotal until long after they've passed, when you're looking back and you see the precise hairline fracture where your life split into a before and an after. For me, that moment was the weight of Leo's head settling onto my shoulder. It was a simple thing, a gesture born of exhaustion and the comfortable quiet that had always existed between us, but it landed with the force of a tectonic shift, rearranging the entire landscape of my heart. We were on my worn-out gray couch, the one with the slight dip in the middle where we always sat. The television was murmuring some action movie that neither of us was really watching, its flickering blues and oranges painting phantom shapes on the walls of the dark living room. It was late, the kind of late that feels borrowed from the next day, and the world outside my apartment had dissolved into a watercolor wash of wet streets and distant sirens. His breathing, which had been a steady, quiet rhythm beside me, deepened and slowed, and then, without any warning, his head tilted, his hair brushing against my neck, and he was asleep. Just like that. The movie kept playing. The rain kept falling. And I stopped breathing. I had known Leo for 6 years. We met in that strange, nebulous period after college when everyone is trying to build a new life out of the spare parts of their old one. I was a freelance photographer, piecing together a career from weddings and corporate headshots, spending my days in a darkroom or hunched over a laptop, feeling perpetually isolated in a city of millions. He was a software consultant, all sharp suits and sharper wit, a whirlwind of client meetings and travel schedules that seemed impossibly glamorous to me. We orbited in different universes, but a mutual friend, convinced our respective quietness and loudness would somehow balance each other out, dragged us both to a disastrously loud trivia night at a bar downtown. We lost, spectacularly, but we discovered a shared, bone-deep exhaustion with the performative social rituals of our mid-20s. We found a corner booth, and for 2 hours, we just talked. He spoke of the crushing pressure of his job, the endless cycle of airports and sterile hotel rooms, the feeling of living a life that wasn't quite his own. I spoke of the loneliness of creative work, the ache of trying to capture a perfect moment on film when my own life felt like a blur of underexposed frames. There was an immediate, unforced ease between us, a sense of recognition. It felt less like a meeting and more like a remembering. Our friendship solidified quickly, built on a foundation of late-night takeout, bad movies, and the kind of comfortable silence that only grows between two people who don't need to fill every available space with noise. He was the anchor in my drifting life. He'd call me from a layover in Chicago just to complain about the airport coffee, and I'd text him photos of my cats sleeping in absurd positions. He was the one who convinced me to submit my work to a gallery, who showed up on opening night with a bottle of cheap champagne and a grin that outshone every flashbulb. And I was the one he called when a project imploded, the one who would listen to him vent for an hour before quietly asking if he'd eaten anything that day. He was brilliant and charismatic, a sun that people naturally orbited. Girls fell for him constantly, a string of bright, lovely women who never seemed to last. They were drawn to his light, but they couldn't seem to navigate the shadows he kept so well hidden, the deep well of restlessness that I saw so clearly. I saw it because I had one too. Mine was just quieter. And somewhere in those first few years, in the shared pizzas and the inside jokes and the easy intimacy of our friendship, I had fallen in love with him. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic event. It was a slow creep, a gradual realization that bloomed in my chest with the quiet inevitability of a season changing. It was in the way my stomach would flip when he'd throw an arm around my shoulders in a casual, brotherly hug. It was in the way I'd find myself studying the curve of his smile, or the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, trying to memorize the cartography of his face like it was a map to somewhere I desperately wanted to go. It was a hopeless, secret thing, a beautiful ache I carried around in a locked room inside my own heart. I was the quiet observer, the keeper of his casual confessions, the safe harbor where he could dock when the storms of his life got too rough. I knew the architecture of his moods better than I knew my own. I could tell by the set of his jaw if a client was giving him hell, or by the slight dip in his voice if he was feeling that familiar pull of loneliness. To him, I was Jules, his best friend. Solid, dependable, safe. And I was terrified that if he ever saw the truth of what I felt, that carefully constructed safety would shatter, and I would lose him entirely. So I became a master of emotional containment, of keeping my own currents hidden beneath a placid surface. My love was a silent, patient thing, content to live in the shadows of what we were allowed to be. The shift began on a Tuesday in October. The air had turned crisp, and the leaves were just beginning their slow, beautiful surrender to winter. Leo had been dating a woman named Sarah for about 8 months. She was a lawyer, smart and ambitious, and, from what I could tell, genuinely kind. I had braced myself for this one to be different, for it to stick. But then he called me, his voice thin and tight over the phone. She ended it just that. 3 words that felt like he was reporting a casualty. He tried to sound nonchalant, but I could hear the fracture in his voice, the tremor of something breaking. He said he was fine, that he was just going to work late, but I knew his patterns. I knew that his version of working late was sitting in his sterile, empty office, staring at a screen until the city lights blurred into an abstract painting of his own misery. 2 hours later, I showed up at his office with a bag of greasy burgers and fries. He looked up when I walked in, his face pale under the harsh fluorescent lights, his tie loosened, and the carefully constructed armor he wore for the world was gone. He just looked tired, so incredibly tired. We ate in silence, and then I drove him back to his pristine, minimalist apartment that had always felt more like a showroom than a home. It was a space designed for someone who was never there, a place to store a suit and sleep for a few hours before catching the next flight. It offered no comfort. "You can't stay here tonight," I said, looking around at the cold glass and steel. It wasn't a question. He just nodded, a slow, weary dip of his head. He didn't have the energy to argue. He followed me back to my place, a small, cluttered apartment filled with books and camera equipment and the comfortable chaos of a life being lived. He showered, borrowed a pair of my sweatpants that were too short for him, and crashed on my couch without a word. He slept for 12 hours straight, a deep, exhausted sleep that seemed to be years in the making. In the morning, he drank 2 cups of my terrible coffee, looked at me with eyes that were clearer than I'd seen them in months, and said, "Thanks, Jules." It felt like more than just gratitude for a place to sleep. It felt like an acknowledgement of something deeper, a recognition of the sanctuary I had offered without him ever having to ask for it. That night set a new precedent. The breakup with Sarah wasn't just a breakup, it was a catalyst. It seemed to have dislodged something in him, shaking loose a deep-seated exhaustion that his relentless forward momentum had kept at bay. His work became more demanding, a big project that had him stretched thin, working impossible hours. The combination of professional burnout and emotional fallout left him frayed at the edges, the bright energy that usually surrounded him dimmed to a low, flickering flame. Our evenings together, once a weekly occurrence, became more frequent, more necessary. He'd text me late in the afternoon, "Movie tonight?" It was a code. It meant, I can't face my empty apartment. I can't bear the silence. I need to be somewhere that feels like home. He would show up at my door, shedding his work persona like a heavy coat. The sharp lines of his suit would be replaced by the soft fabric of my old university hoodie. The confident consultant would dissolve, and he would just be Leo, tired and hungry and in need of a quiet place to land. We fell into a new rhythm, an unspoken ritual. He would collapse onto the couch, I would order food, and we would lose ourselves in the mindless escapism of a film. We rarely talked about Sarah or the stress of his job. The silence was the point. It was a shared space where he didn't have to perform, where he could just be. And I, the quiet observer, watched him. I watched the tension slowly leave his shoulders as the evening wore on. I watched the guarded look in his eyes soften in the low light of the living room. I was so careful, so practiced in the art of hiding my own heart, that I thought I was perfectly safe. I could have him here, in my space, and it could be enough. I told myself it was enough. And that brings us back to that first Tuesday, the first time the unspoken rules were broken. He had been particularly quiet all evening, his gaze distant, his body coiled with a tension that even 2 hours of a mindless action movie couldn't undo. The rain was drumming a soft, hypnotic rhythm on the glass. The city outside felt a million miles away. We were in our bubble, our small pocket of quiet in a loud world. When his head finally dropped onto my shoulder, my entire body went rigid. It was a simple, unconscious act of a man seeking comfort in sleep, but for me, it was a cataclysm. I sat there, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Every nerve ending in my body was screamingly aware of him. I could feel the warmth of his cheek through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. I could smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. I could feel the soft puff of his breath against my neck with every slow exhale. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, a wild, panicked bird beating its wings against a cage. 1,000 warring thoughts crashed through my mind. Move. You have to move. If you don't, it means something. If he wakes up, it'll be awkward. You'll ruin everything. But another voice, a quieter, more treacherous one, whispered, "Stay. Just for a minute. Just stay." So I stayed. I let the frantic bird in my chest exhaust itself into a quiet, trembling rhythm. I slowly, carefully, let my own muscles relax. I let myself absorb the reality of the moment. The sheer, solid weight of him against me. It was grounding. It was terrifying. It was the most exquisitely painful and beautiful thing I had ever felt. He was trusting me, even in his sleep. He had sought out this small point of contact, this anchor in the dark. I was his safe harbor, and he had finally, truly, docked. I don't know how long I sat there, a statue carved from anxiety and longing. The movie ended, the credits rolled, and the screen went black, plunging the room into a deeper darkness, broken only by the ambient glow of the city filtering through the blinds. His breathing was the only sound, a deep and steady metronome marking the passage of time. I eventually found the courage to move, shifting with painstaking slowness, trying not to wake him. I reached for the remote and turned off the television, then gently eased his head off my shoulder and onto a cushion. He mumbled something incoherent, shifting slightly, but didn't wake. I stood up, my own muscles stiff and aching, and pulled the Afghan from the back of the armchair, draping it over him. For a long moment, I just stood there in the dark, watching him sleep. His face, usually so animated and expressive, was calm and unguarded. The faint lines of stress around his eyes had smoothed away. He looked younger, more vulnerable. He looked like the person I saw when no one else was looking. My heart ached with a tenderness so profound it felt like a physical wound. This was a dangerous new territory. This was a boundary crossed, not with a bang, but with a quiet, sleeping breath. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that nothing would ever be the same. The next time he came over, a few nights later, there was a new, unspoken awareness hanging in the air between us. It was a subtle charge, a hum of static just beneath the surface of our usual easy banter. We didn't mention him falling asleep on me. To bring it up would be to give it weight, to acknowledge that it was more than just an accident. It would be like trying to capture a ghost with a butterfly net. The very act of trying would make it disappear. But we both knew. I knew because the memory of his weight against me was a phantom limb I could still feel. And I suspected he knew because he was just a little bit quieter, a little more watchful. He seemed to be studying me, trying to gauge my reaction to a thing we were both pretending hadn't happened. The ritual continued, but it had changed. The space on the couch between us, once a comfortable, neutral territory, was now a loaded landscape. Every accidental brush of our hands as we reached for the popcorn bowl, every time our knees touched, sent a jolt through me that I had to consciously, carefully, conceal. Then, about a week after the first time, it happened again. We were watching some slow, atmospheric documentary that was more mood than plot. I could feel him getting drowsy beside me, his blinks becoming longer, his posture slumping. I braced myself, my body tensing in anticipation. I could feel the gravitational pull between us, the slow, inevitable tilt. This time, When his head came to rest on my shoulder, it felt less like an accident and more like a destination. He sighed, a soft, contented sound that vibrated through my collarbone and straight into my heart, and nestled in, his body relaxing against mine in a way that felt deliberate, trusting. And this time, I didn't freeze. I accepted it. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for a week, and, after a moment of fierce internal debate, I slowly, tentatively, rested my own head against his. The contact was electric. The scent of his hair, the warmth of his skin, the solid, living presence of him tucked against me. It was overwhelming. We sat like that for the rest of the film, two halves of a whole, perfectly fitted together in the darkness. The silence in the room was no longer just comfortable. It was intimate. It was a shared language. It was a confession. This became our new normal. The movie nights were no longer just about the movie. They were a pretext for this quiet, desperate closeness. Sometimes he would fall asleep, his breathing a soft rhythm against my neck. Other times, we would both be wide awake, staring at the screen, hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. His arm resting against mine, his leg pressed against my leg, his head on my shoulder. It was a strange and delicate dance of plausible deniability. He needed the comfort, the physical reassurance, and I was the only one he felt safe enough to take it from. And I, starving for any scrap of affection, was more than willing to give it. But it was torture. Every night he was there, my apartment would transform. The four walls of my living room became the entire universe, and the space between us was charged with all the things we couldn't say. And every night when he would eventually stir, mumbling an apology, and head home, the silence he left behind was cavernous. The imprint of his warmth on the couch cushions would feel like a cruel joke. I was living in a state of suspended animation, caught between the sheer, breathtaking joy of having him so close and the crushing anxiety of knowing it was all built on a fragile, unspoken premise. I was a stand-in, a substitute for a comfort he couldn't or wouldn't seek elsewhere. I was his best friend, and this was just what friends did. Or so I told myself, over and over, a mantra to keep the hope from growing too wild, too dangerous. The nights grew colder. The ritual evolved. One evening, after a particularly grueling week, he fell asleep so deeply on my shoulder that I couldn't bring myself to move him. I let him sleep there for hours, my own body contorted into an uncomfortable position, my arm going numb beneath his weight. When he finally woke up around 2 a.m, he was groggy and disoriented. He blinked at me, his eyes unfocused. "God, Jules. I'm sorry. My neck is killing me." He rubbed the back of his neck, wincing. "The couch is destroying me," he added with a weak laugh. My heart seized. An idea, reckless and terrifying, surfaced in my mind. "My bed's more comfortable," I heard myself say. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile. It was an offer. It was a door left ajar. He looked at me, his expression unreadable in the dim light. I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Hesitation, maybe. Or was it relief? I couldn't be sure. I was an expert at reading his moods, but this was uncharted territory. This was a dialect I didn't understand. "I don't want to kick you out of your own bed," he said, his voice low. "It's a queen," I replied, my own voice sounding strangely steady, belying the frantic chaos in my chest. "There's plenty of room. It's better than you getting a crick in your neck." I tried to make it sound practical, logical. A solution to a problem. Nothing more. He was silent for a long moment, just looking at me. Then he nodded slowly. Okay, that one word was a turning point. Walking down the short hallway to my bedroom felt like crossing a continent. The air was thick with a tension so profound I could almost taste it. This was different from the couch. The couch was a public space, a semi-neutral ground. A bed was an intimate landscape, a private geography of sleep and dreams. There was no plausible deniability here. This was a choice. I got in on my usual side, and he hesitated for a second before sliding in on the other. The space between us on the mattress felt enormous, a vast, empty desert. We lay on our backs, side by side, staring up at the ceiling, not touching. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. I was acutely aware of him, of the heat radiating from his body, of the slight dip his weight made in the mattress. I had imagined this scenario 1,000 times in the deepest, most secret corners of my mind, but the reality was nothing like my daydreams. It wasn't romantic or passionate. It was terrifying. It was fragile. It felt like we were standing on a sheet of thin ice, and any sudden move could send us plunging into the freezing water below. "Jules," he whispered into the darkness, his voice barely audible. "Yeah," I whispered back, my throat tight. "Thanks," he said, "for everything." I could only manage a nod, even though he couldn't see it in the dark. A few minutes passed in that charged silence. I thought he had fallen asleep, but then I felt him shift. He rolled onto his side, facing me. I held my breath, my body rigid. Was this it? Was this the moment the ice would crack? But he just lay there. I could feel his gaze on me in the darkness. Then, slowly, as if moving through water, he reached out and his hand found mine under the covers. He didn't interlace our fingers. He just laid his hand over top of mine, his palm covering my knuckles. A simple, warm, heavy point of contact. It wasn't a lover's touch. It was the touch of a drowning man grabbing for a lifeline. And I was his lifeline. My heart, which had been pounding with anxiety, suddenly settled into a deep, slow, painful rhythm. This wasn't a confession. This was a plea for comfort, for connection, in the loneliest hours of the night. I understood. I turned my hand over, and our fingers loosely intertwined. He squeezed my hand once, a faint pressure, and then his breathing began to even out, deepening into the slow, steady cadence of sleep. I lay awake for hours, his hand in mine, staring into the darkness, feeling like the guardian of his exhausted peace. I was drowning right there alongside him, in an ocean of my own silent, unrequited love. This, too, became part of the ritual. The movie nights on the couch now bled seamlessly into the quiet migration to my bedroom. The pretense of him just crashing wore thinner with each passing week, until it evaporated completely. He started keeping a toothbrush in my bathroom, a change of clothes in my bottom drawer. My apartment was becoming his home, his sanctuary, and my bed was becoming our shared space. We never spoke of it. We never addressed the fact that we, two supposedly straight best friends, were sleeping in the same bed night after night. We developed an unspoken choreography. We'd get into bed, turn off the lights, and in the darkness, he would find my hand. It was our anchor. Some nights, that was all there was, our hands clasped in the space between us. But other nights, driven by some deep, unspoken need, he would move closer. He would turn onto his side, and I would turn to face him, and he would press his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the small space between our faces. Or he would shift until his back was pressed against my chest, and I would lie there, my arm instinctively coming to rest around his waist, holding him. I would hold him as he slept, my chin resting on the top of his head, breathing in his scent, feeling the rise and fall of his chest with every breath. These were the moments that both sustained and destroyed me. In the silent darkness of my bedroom, I could pretend. I could pretend that this was real, that this intimacy was born of mutual desire and not just his desperate need and my silent acquiescence. I was a photograph slowly developing in a darkroom, the image of what we could be becoming clearer and clearer, but I was terrified of what would happen if anyone ever turned on the lights. During the day, we would revert back to our old selves. We'd make coffee, talk about work, joke around. We were just Jules and Leo, best friends. But the nights were a different country, a secret territory with its own language and its own rules. And the dissonance was tearing me apart. I was living a dual life, and the strain of it was beginning to show. I was more tired, more on edge. My carefully constructed walls of emotional containment were beginning to crumble. How long could this go on? How long could we live in this beautiful, painful, ambiguous space before it collapsed? I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the inevitable moment when the silence would be broken, when a question would be asked that I was not prepared to answer, or one that I was terrified to ask myself. The breaking point came on a Saturday. It wasn't a dramatic night. It was just another night, soft and quiet. We had foregone a movie in favor of just lying in bed, reading our respective books under the warm glow of our bedside lamps. The rain was back, a gentle, persistent drizzle against the window. It felt peaceful, domestic. After a while, Leo put his book down and turned off his lamp, plunging his side of the bed into shadow. I kept reading, aware of him watching me. I could feel his eyes on my face, and the intensity of his unseen gaze made the words on the page swim. Finally, I gave up, placing my bookmark and setting the book aside. I turned off my own light, and we were left in the familiar, comfortable darkness. I turned onto my side to face him, and he was already there, a dark shape against the slightly less dark room. He didn't reach for my hand this time. The silence stretched, but it wasn't the comfortable silence of our evenings. This was a heavy, weighted silence. It was the silence of a question waiting to be formed. Jules. His voice was a low murmur, but it sliced through the quiet. Yeah. My heart began its familiar, frantic rhythm. Can I ask you something stupid? He said. I swallowed hard. There are no stupid questions with us, Leo. You know that. He was quiet for another long moment. I could just make out the shape of him, the way he was worrying his lower lip with his teeth, a nervous habit he'd had since I'd known him. Would it be okay? He started, then stopped. He took a breath. Would it be okay if I kissed you? The world stopped. The rain, the city, the hum of the refrigerator, it all faded away into a dull, distant roar. The only thing that existed was his question, hanging in the air between us like a suspended star. It was the question I had both longed for and dreaded for 6 years. It was the question that could save me or shatter me completely. My mind raced, a whirlwind of fear and hope. Was he drunk? Was he just lonely? Was this another plea for comfort, a new level of intimacy he needed to borrow from our friendship? Was I just a port in a storm, a convenient body in the dark? The observer in me, the self-protective part that had kept my heart safe for so long, screamed at me to say no, to laugh it off, to pretend he was joking. Don't risk it. Don't lose him. But then I looked at his silhouette in the darkness. I saw not the charismatic, confident man the world saw, but the vulnerable, searching soul who came to my apartment seeking refuge. The man who trusted me with his exhaustion, his sadness, and his sleep. The man whose hand I held in the dark night after night. And I realized that I was tired. I was tired of observing, of analyzing, of living in the safe, sterile world of the hypothetical. I was tired of being a ghost in my own life. I didn't say anything. I couldn't have formed a word if my life depended on it. Instead, I moved. I closed the small distance between us, the inches that had always felt like miles, and I cupped his jaw with my hand. His skin was warm, the stubble of his beard rough against my palm. He let out a shaky breath, a small, surrendered sound. And then I kissed him. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of quiet reverence. It was slow and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. It was 6 years of unspoken words, of silent longing, of carefully guarded friendship, all compressed into a single, fragile moment. His lips were soft, hesitant against mine. He wasn't leading, and neither was I. We were meeting in the middle, two explorers discovering a new world together. When we finally broke apart, we just rested our foreheads together, breathing the same air. The silence that returned was different. It wasn't empty or charged. It was full. It was peaceful. It was the sound of the ice not breaking, but melting. The morning after was terrifying. I woke up first, just as the sun was beginning to cast a pale, gray light into the room. Leo was still asleep, his back to me, his body curled into a coma. The events of the night before came rushing back, and a cold wave of anxiety washed over me. What had we done? In the clarity of daylight, the tender intimacy of the darkness felt reckless, dangerous. I had crossed a line I had sworn to myself I would never cross. I had traded the certainty of his friendship for the terrifying ambiguity of this. What was this? I slipped out of bed as quietly as I could, my movements stiff and robotic. I went into the kitchen and started the coffee maker, my hands trembling slightly. I leaned against the counter, the cold laminate a stark contrast to the warmth of the bed, and stared out the window at the waking city. I felt completely, utterly exposed. The armor I had worn for 6 years was gone, and I had no idea what was coming next. When Leo finally emerged from the bedroom about an hour later, the atmosphere was thick with a new kind of tension. He wasn't wearing his usual borrowed sweatpants and t-shirt. He was dressed in the clothes he'd worn the day before, his suit pants wrinkled, his shirt buttoned up to the collar. He looked like he was putting his armor back on. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just mumbled a morning and went straight to the coffee maker, pouring himself a cup. The easy, comfortable domesticity of our usual mornings was gone, replaced by a stiff, formal silence. We were two strangers in my kitchen. "Leo," I started, my voice sounding weak. He flinched, just a little, at the sound of his name. He took a long sip of his coffee, his back still mostly to me. "I should get going," he said, his voice flat. "I have a bunch of work to catch up on." It was a lie. It was Saturday. We both knew it was a lie. "Leo, we need to talk about last night," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He finally turned to look at me, but his gaze was guarded, distant. The open, vulnerable man from the night before was gone, replaced by the cool, efficient consultant. "There's nothing to talk about," he said, his tone clipped. "It was a mistake. I was tired. Confused. I'm sorry, Jules. I shouldn't have put you in that position." Each word was a physical blow. A mistake. Confused. Sorry. He was erasing it. He was taking the most honest, real moment of my life and labeling it as an error, an anomaly. The hope that had bloomed so tentatively in my chest overnight withered and died. In its place, a cold, sharp anger began to rise. It wasn't just hurt. It was a deep, profound frustration. After everything, after all the nights of holding him, of offering him a sanctuary, he was retreating behind a wall of denial, leaving me alone in the rubble of what we had built. "A mistake?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "That's what that was to you? You asked me if you can kiss me, and now it's a mistake?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of pure agitation. "Look, I don't know what it was, okay? I'm not. This isn't me. What isn't you, Leo?" I pressed, taking a step closer. "Being honest? Feeling something real for once instead of hiding in your work or behind another girlfriend who you never really let in." The words were sharper than I intended, but I couldn't stop them. The dam had broken. "That's not fair," he shot back, his eyes flashing with defensiveness. "You don't know anything about that. I know everything," I said, my voice finally rising. "I know you better than anyone. I know you're lonely and you're scared, and you came here night after night because you felt safe. I let you in. I held you when you were falling apart. And last night, that wasn't a mistake. That was the only thing that has ever made sense. Don't you dare try to tell me it wasn't." He just stared at me, his face pale, his expression a mixture of shock and something else, something that looked like fear. He opened his mouth to say something, then closed it again. He looked trapped. He put his coffee mug down on the counter with a sharp clink, turned, and walked out of my apartment without another word. The sound of the front door closing behind him was deafening. It echoed in the sudden, crushing silence of the room. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the drip of the coffee maker, the world tilting on its axis. I had risked everything. I had shown him my heart, and he had walked away. I had lost him. The safe harbor was gone, and I was adrift in the storm. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. The silence from Leo was absolute. No calls, no texts, not even a cursory email. It was as if he had vanished, erased from my life as cleanly as he had tried to erase our kiss. My apartment, once a sanctuary, felt like a prison. Every corner of it held a ghost of him. The dip in the couch, the extra toothbrush in the bathroom, the scent of him that still lingered on my pillows. It was a constant, painful reminder of what I had lost. I oscillated between a deep, aching sadness and a simmering anger. I was angry at him for his cowardice, for his inability to face his own feelings. But I was also angry at myself. I had known the risks. I had known how fragile he was, and I had pushed him, demanding an honesty he wasn't ready to give. I replayed our last conversation over and over in my head, dissecting every word, every look. Had I misinterpreted everything? Had I built this entire, elaborate fantasy in my own mind, projecting my own feelings onto his simple need for friendship? The doubt was a poison, seeping into every memory, tainting every moment of intimacy we had shared. I tried to lose myself in the familiar process of developing film, but the darkroom offered no escape. The images emerging in the chemical bath seemed to mock me, capturing moments of intimacy between strangers at weddings, the very thing that felt so impossibly out of reach for me. After 5 days of this self-imposed torment, I knew I couldn't let it end like this. Our friendship, our 6 years of history, was worth more than a panicked retreat and a slammed door. It deserved more than this hollow, painful silence. Whether we could ever go back to what we were or move forward into something new, we had to talk. We had to face the wreckage. I had to know, for my own sanity, what was real and what was a figment of my own hopeful imagination. With a sense of grim determination, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts list. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. I was either going to salvage something from the ruins, or I was going to burn the whole thing to the ground for good. I took a deep breath and hit call. He answered on the 4th ring, just as I was about to lose my nerve and hang up. "Jules," he said. His voice was rough, tired. "We need to talk," I said, skipping any pleasantries. "I'm coming over." I didn't give him a chance to refuse. I hung up, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door before my courage could desert me. The walk to his apartment, a route I had taken 100 times, felt foreign and fraught with peril. When I got there, he opened the door immediately, as if he'd been waiting right behind it. He looked terrible. He was still in his work clothes from the day before. His hair was a mess, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. His pristine apartment was in a state of disarray. There were takeout containers on the glass coffee table and a stack of files spilling onto the floor. It was the first time I had ever seen his space look lived in, and it was because it was being lived in by a man who was falling apart. He didn't say anything, just stepped aside to let me in. I walked to the center of the living room, and he closed the door, shutting us in with the suffocating tension. "I'm sorry," he said, finally breaking the silence. He wouldn't look at me, his gaze fixed on a point on the floor somewhere to my left. "For walking out. That was cowardly, yes, it was." I agreed, my voice flat. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. "Leo, what is going on? Talk to me. Not the consultant, not the guy who has it all figured out. Just you. Talk to me." He finally looked up at me, and his eyes were filled with a raw, desperate confusion that made my anger falter. He looked like a lost kid. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I don't know what's going on, Jules. My whole life, I've had a plan. A blueprint. College, job, promotion, find a nice girl, get married. It was all laid out, and it all made sense. But for the past year, maybe longer, none of it has felt right. It's all felt hollow. Like I'm playing a part, and I've forgotten my lines." He paced the small living room, running his hands through his hair. "And then Sarah ended it, and I should have been devastated, but mostly I was just relieved. And tired. So tired of pretending. And being at your place, it was the only place I didn't have to pretend. It was the only place I felt real." He stopped in front of the large window that overlooked the city, his back to me. "And those nights, sleeping next to you, holding your hand, it was the first time I felt quiet inside in years. It was the first time I felt safe. And I didn't understand it. I didn't let myself understand it. I just knew I needed it. I needed you." He took a shaky breath. "And then I kissed you. And for 1 second, everything made sense. It was like the whole universe clicked into place. It was the most right thing I have ever felt in my entire life." He turned around to face me, and there were tears shimmering in his eyes. "And it terrified me. Because it's not in the blueprint, Jules. You're not in the plan. This feeling, it wrecks the whole plan. And I looked at it in the morning, and all I could see was how I was ruining your life. How I was using you because I was a mess. How I was breaking my best friend. And I panicked. I ran. I listened to his confession, my own anger melting away, replaced by a wave of profound, aching empathy. He wasn't running from me. He was running from himself. He was running from a truth so fundamental it threatened to undo his entire identity. I closed the distance between us, standing in front of him until he was forced to meet my gaze. "You think you're ruining my life?" I asked, my voice soft. "Leo, for 6 years, I have been half-living. I built a fortress around my own heart so that I wouldn't lose you. I watched you with other people, and I smiled, and I was the good, supportive friend, and it was tearing me apart inside. Every single night that you were at my place, that you fell asleep on my shoulder, that you held my hand in the dark, that wasn't you using me. That was the only thing that made me feel like I could breathe. You didn't wreck anything, you idiot." A tear finally escaped and traced a path down his cheek. "You're the whole plan. You've always been the plan." A choked sob escaped him, a sound of grief and relief all at once. And then he collapsed into me, his arms wrapping around me, holding on like I was the only solid thing in a world that had dissolved around him. I held him back, just as I had all those nights in my bed, but this was different. There was no ambiguity, no unspoken tension. This was a surrender. This was an admission. We stood there in the middle of his messy living room for a long time, just holding each other. There were no more words to say. We had finally broken the beautiful, terrible silence, and the truth, as terrifying as it was finally out in the open. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The days that followed were quiet, tentative. We were charting a new map, learning the geography of this new world we had discovered together. There was an awkwardness at first, a shyness that hadn't existed in our friendship. We were learning how to be with each other without the safety net of plausible deniability. The first time he kissed me in the daylight, in my sun-drenched kitchen while we were waiting for the coffee to brew, it was hesitant and sweet, a question he was still learning to ask. I answered it by threading my fingers into his hair and pulling him closer, showing him that this was real, that he didn't have to be afraid. We talked. For the first time, we really talked. He told me about the suffocating weight of expectations, his own and his family's. He spoke of his fear, not of being with a man, but of disappointing everyone, of not knowing who he was if he wasn't the person everyone thought he should be. And I told him about the years of quiet longing, the loneliness of loving someone in secret. We laid all our ghosts out between us, and in the shared light of honesty, they began to fade. The ritual of our movie nights returned, but it was transformed. There was no pretext anymore. He would come over, and we would curl up on the couch, his head on my shoulder, my arm around him, and it was just easy. The frantic bird in my chest was gone, replaced by a deep, steady calm. The anxiety of being discovered was replaced by the profound peace of being seen. When we went to bed, we no longer lay inches apart, waiting for the cover of darkness to reach for each other. He would wrap himself around me, or I around him, and we would fall asleep in a tangle of limbs, our breathing synchronized. The vast, empty desert of the mattress was gone. It was just our space now, a shared island. My apartment, which had once been my solitary fortress, and then his temporary sanctuary, finally became our home. He still kept his own place, but he was rarely there. He slowly moved his life into mine, one box of books, one favorite coffee mug, one wrinkled suit at a time. The empty space in my closet filled up. His aftershave mingled with my soap in the bathroom. These small domestic invasions were affirmations, quiet statements of intent. We began to build a new life, not from a pre-written blueprint, but from scratch, finding the pieces that fit us. It was a life built on small moments. Cooking dinner together, arguing about what to watch, reading side by side in a comfortable silence that was no longer charged with unspoken feelings, but filled with a deep and abiding peace. He started to smile more, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached his eyes. The restless energy that had always hummed beneath his surface was calming, settling into a quiet confidence. And I, the quiet observer, finally stepped out from behind the camera. I was no longer just documenting life. I was living it. The locked room in my heart was thrown wide open, and it was filled with light. One rainy Saturday afternoon, months later, we were lying on the couch, tangled up together under a blanket, the television murmuring in the background. It was an echo of that first night, the night that had fractured my life into a before and an after. He was tracing idle patterns on my arm with his finger, his head resting on my chest. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, his voice soft, "Do you ever think about how terrified I was?" I looked down at the top of his head, at the familiar whirl of his hair. "Every day," I admitted. He tilted his head back to look at me. I was so scared of breaking the one good thing in my life. Our friendship. I thought if I admitted what I was feeling, it would all just combust. I smiled, tightening my arm around him. "I know the feeling. I thought if you ever knew how I felt, you'd run for the hills." He shook his head, a look of wonder on his face. "We were two idiots," he said with a soft laugh. "Sitting in the dark, both holding a match, both terrified the other one was going to strike it first." He settled back down, pressing a kiss to my collarbone. "I'm glad you struck it," he whispered. "No." I corrected him gently, my hand coming up to rest in his hair. "You did. You were just too scared to look at the flame." There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, if you're patient enough, if you're lucky enough, you learn that these moments aren't fractures at all. They are doors. They are invitations to step out of the life you thought you were supposed to have and into the one that was waiting for you all along. He was right. We were two idiots, lost in our own private darkness. But together, in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create, we finally found our way home. The space between us, once a chasm of fear and unspoken longing, was gone. And what was left was simply us. And it was more than enough. It was everything.